All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. We're into accessibility, and as you can see, we're into the what is accessibility. So this article starts off with a look at what accessibility is, including the groups of people we need to consider and why, the different tools that people use to interact with the web, and how we can make accessibility part of the web development workflow. So, as mentioned here, what is accessibility? It's the practice of making your website usable by as many people as possible. You can't say anything better than that. It says traditionally we think of this as about people with disabilities. And again, that's not really a word we're supposed to use anymore. It's people, I've been told at least, we should say people with some kind of an impairment. Still, as it says, the practice of making sites accessible also benefits other groups, such as those using mobile devices or those who have slow network connections. You might also think of accessibility as treating everyone the same and giving them equal opportunities. Well, that's how life is supposed to be. Unfortunately, we don't exactly live in a world, or at least in a country, that always does that. All right, so no matter what their ability or circumstances. Just as it's wrong to exclude someone from a physical building because they're in a wheelchair, it's also not right to exclude someone from a website because they have a visual impairment. We're all different, we're all human, we're all the same. All right? Accessibility is the right thing to do. And depending on the type of site you're creating, it also may be the law. The more public your website is, for example, government websites, you're always going to find accessibility things that have been put in there. But even, any site, I've said this before, either in this series or in the classroom, and that is that any site, for example, that provides a service that is going to require people to put out some cash or something, whether it be a physical service or not, all right, you want to make that service available to everyone. So building sites, accessible sites, benefits everyone. Semantic HTML, caring about accessibility demonstrates good ethics and morals. Other good practices that improve accessibility make your site usable to all. Things like cell phone users. And it says, did we mention it's also the law? And I've already said that. So, what kind of disability are we looking at? People with disabilities are just as diverse as people without, and so are their disabilities. And again, what I want to do is I want to stop using the word disability, start using the word impairment. I'm not sure, I don't know many people who have any kind of a disability. All right, I do know some, but that said, I don't know, I don't ever want to say anything and say, well, I know that they don't want to use the word disability, they want to use the word impairment. All right, I think the word impairment has less of a bad connotation or stigma to it than does disability. And if I'm wrong, if anybody watches this and you've got any kind of impairment or you'd rather have it known as a disability, please let me know. But we live in a world today too where people have things like ADD, ADHD, etc. I've had several students like that. I've had totally blind students. I've had legally blind students. All right. I have not had, I shouldn't say that. I have had one deaf student. I know Mr. Corrigan last semester, my boss, had a deaf student. All right. So it says the key lesson here is to think beyond your own computer. The main types of disabilities to consider are explained below. So people with visual impairments, we've talked about this. I had a woman years ago, she was totally blind. She came into class with her dog, and she used this product that you see here called JAWS. Now, I'm sure it's been refined over the years, but at the time, and she did not use headphones, but if she was going to type in hello world, it would have literally, and I can't do it justice, but it would have sounded like HALLO space WORLD. And she turned it up kind of loud. She was a little bit older, and she may have had some hearing problems. And there were two things that she didn't like. Number one, she didn't like anybody talking to her. And number two, she didn't like anybody messing with her dog. All right, even petting it, saying hello or whatever. All right. But people with visual impairments include people with blindness, and that's different degrees, low-level vision, or color blindness. And I may have mentioned this before. I've got an older brother who's colorblind. He was in the Navy for 7 years, but a couple times he was not even accepted into the Navy because of his color blindness. So it says some users will rely on screen readers, and some of the readers are shown here. It's a good idea, if and when possible, to familiarize yourself with these readers. It says you should also set up a screen reader and have a play around with it. Yeah, especially if you're creating a website that's going to be used by and with everyone. All right. The World Health Organization estimates 285 people are estimated to be visually impaired worldwide. 39 with totally blind, 246 with low vision. All right, then we've got hearing impairments, also known as auditory impairments. All right, it says there are specific techniques for providing textual alternative to audio content, which range from simple transcripts to text tracks. All right, hearing impaired people also represent a significant user base. 466 million people worldwide have disabling hearing loss. Now, some of them may also be blind, but if you do look at them as two different groups, all right, that's 285 million and 466 million. Do the math. All right, that is over 700, closer to 800 million people that they're talking about. Then there's mobility impairments. All right, and it says they might involve purely physical issues. They might have only one arm or leg or whatever. There may be other things. Okay? This kind of disability can be a result of old age rather than trauma or a condition. It could also be a result of hardware limitations. Okay? So again, there's all sorts of things. It could even be something as simple as someone doesn't have a mouse. All right? Or because of some kind of an impairment that rather than a mouse, they use a trackball. And as it says here, the way this usually affects web development is the requirement that controls be accessible by the keyboard, all right? And you might have to make it accessible by something else too. As it says, can you use the tab key to move between different controls in the form? In terms of the number of people in here, it says a significant number of people with mobility have mobility impairments. The U.S. Center for Disease Control has the percentage of adults with physical functioning difficulty as 16.1%, which basically does say about 1 out of every 6 people. All right, so if I'm in a classroom that's filled up with 24 people, all right, that's saying that literally 4 of them could have some kind of a physical disability. There's also cognitive impairments. Here's where it's really important, because I've heard stories, I've never seen this, but for example, that people who are schizophrenic, that they have trouble, for example, and I've heard of cases where they go into seizures and the like when they see a lot of flashing on the screen or a lot of bright red flashing on the screen. Okay, so it says a good foundation of accessibility for people with cognitive impairments includes, I'm not going to read to you. Some of this stuff should just make sense. You want to provide alternatives, whatever that is. If it's a sight impairment, you want to give them another way of being able to, quote, see the content. If it's an auditory impairment, you want to give them another way of, quote, hearing, unquote. All right, the site and what it has to offer. If it's physical in nature, you want to be able to let them work around it. And that's what they're talking about. Most of the stuff that's in here, focusing attention on important content, consistent web page layout and navigation, that makes it easier for everyone. And the author talked about that earlier as well. All right, so here's some notes on that if you want to see some more. All right, implementing accessibility into your project. It says a common myth is that accessibility is expensive added extra. It can be true if either you're trying to retrofit into an existing website, because of course it's going to cost something. You've already got it up there and running. Or you've only started to consider accessibility and uncovered a lot of related issues, all right, late in the project. However, if it's the start of the project, the cost should be minimal. And as mentioned, it should also help all users. All right. When planning your project, they mention here, factor accessibility into your testing regime, just like testing for any other target audience segment. For example, is the date picker widget usable by people with screen readers? If content updates dynamically, do visually impaired people know that? Are the user interface buttons accessible using the keyboard and on touch surfaces? And you could probably come up with your own list and come up with a lot more. So it says there you can and should keep a note of potential problem areas that you'll need to work on, work out, and work through. Be realistic, it says. 100% accessibility might be an unattainable goal, but you should always shoot for it anyway. All right. All right. It says to show that you care and have thought about accessibility, publish an accessibility statement on your site that details what your policy is towards accessibility, what steps you've taken, and also set it up so that if somebody has a problem, they can let you know. All right. So to summarize this section, as they say right there, consider accessibility from the start of the project. Test it early, test it often. Bear in mind that a lot of accessibility practices benefit everyone. And publish an accessibility statement on the site. All right. So accessibility guidelines and the law. I know on these videos that I create, I do not have, I don't even know how to turn it on, to be honest with you. The use of closed captioning. And I don't know if you can closed caption my videos or not. I probably sound a lot better with closed captioning. But that said, and I'm sorry if I don't mean to be sarcastic saying that, but I was told at the school I used to work at, I've been at Rankin here for 5 years, but at the school I previously worked at in Wisconsin, that they were coming in and I was going to have to make sure that I closed captioned all of my videos. If somebody showed me how to do it and it wasn't much work, or if somebody be willing to do it for me, that'd be great. All right, accessibility guidelines and the law. There are numerous checklists and sets of guidelines for basing accessibility tests on. For a start, as mentioned there, the W3C has published a large and detailed document with all sorts of technology agnostic criteria that's called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Again, WCAG. It says the best place to start is this light introduction, which is that at a glance. So it's not real long, but it'll push you off into other directions that you can go to. Your country may have specific legislation. All right. And you have to make those two, meld them and make sure that they work together. It says you need to consider accessibility as a main priority of your web development practices. As long as you do that, you should be okay. Web browsers make use of special accessibility APIs that expose information useful for assistive technologies, or ATs. Mostly, as it says, tend to make use of semantic information. This information is structured in a tree in the form of an accessibility tree. Different operating systems have different accessibility APIs available. The best thing that you can do is, again, start at what we talked about before with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and WCAG at a glance, and then start looking through what you've got, depending on what you're using. Are you using Windows? All right. Is your site designed to run on any kind of system, which most are? Is it a website, or is it an Android app, or is it an iOS app, etc.? So the idea behind this article is it was just designed to get you thinking, to make you a little bit more accessibility aware. All right. So that's it for this second iteration here. What is accessibility? So now we'll jump into the third of 7. CSS or HTML, I should say, a good basis for accessibility. I'll be back with that shortly.